This is not a story about a medicine. This is a story about a monster created in the sterile silence of a laboratory and unleashed under the guise of a miracle packaged in a small white pill. This is a chronicle of a crime committed not in a dark alley with a knife, but in sparkling clean offices to the accompaniment of the clinking of test tubes and the rustling of banknotes. He was brought to the mother at 4 a.m, a white, tightly swaddled bundle in the hands of a midwife who moved with an unnatural, sluggish slowness, as if walking underwater through a dense, invisible jelly of universal horror. Her steps on the cold, tiled floor of the delivery room sounded deafeningly loud, like hammer blows on an anvil, breaking the reverent silence that was supposed to explode at any moment with the first cry of a new life. But there was no cry. Instead, the silence thickened, became viscous, suffocating, like wet cotton wool clogging the lungs. It absorbed all sounds, the faint hum of the fluorescent lamps, the distant noise of the hospital corridor, the ragged, hoarse breathing of the mother, who still didn't understand why her world had stopped. The whole world froze in agonizing anticipation of a sound that never came, and this silence was more terrifying than any scream. The doctor, a grey-haired man with endlessly tired eyes that had seen thousands of births and thousands of deaths, froze halfway to the mother. His face, which just a moment ago had expressed a professional, almost bored calmness, turned into a grey stone mask of primal horror. He looked at the tiny body and his brain, his years of experience. His entire being refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. The newborn baby had almost no arms. From the shoulders, like a cruel, blasphemous mockery of nature, protruded short, formless appendages resembling a seal's flippers. Tiny, perfect, almost jewel-like fingers grew directly from the shoulder joints, as if a mad sculptor, in a last-second fit of despair, had stuck them in the wrong place, creating not a human, but a parody of one. But this was only the beginning of the nightmare that was just unfolding before them. The legs were monstrously twisted and disproportionately short, turned at impossible angles like broken branches. This was not the human form in its familiar divine sense. It was a mistake, a cruel, inexplicable anomaly, a wicked joke of the genetic code imprinted on living, warm flesh. What should have been a miracle had become a curse. The mother, exhausted after a long, difficult labor, looked with trembling, weary hope at the frozen faces of the medics, and her faint smile slowly faded, drowning in that icy, deafening, vacuum-like silence. She did not yet know that right then, at that very minute, in dozens of hospitals across Germany, across Europe, the exact same silent, soul-chilling nightmare was unfolding. What they were seeing was only the first wave of a tsunami that was already heading for the shore to wash away thousands of fates. This was 1961, the year the world saw the Kontergan children. 10,000 mutilated infants, 15,000. No one knows, and no one will ever know the exact number. Most of them died before reaching their first birthday. Their hearts, their kidneys, their hearing, their sight, their internal organs were as mercilessly deformed as their limbs. They were assembled incorrectly, as if by a drunken creator who, as a mockery, decided to see what would come of this cruel experiment. It was a medical holocaust perpetrated not in the gas chambers of concentration camps, but in cozy bedrooms in corner pharmacies in the hands of trusting, loving women who simply wanted to get rid of morning sickness. They believed in science, in progress, in white coats, and this Faith betrayed them in the most brutal way, turning their bodies into incubators for monsters. But at that moment, no one could have even suspected that the roots of this tragedy reached into Germany's darkest past, into the still warm ashes of the Third Reich. The promise was like magic, straight from the pages of glossy magazines. A small white pill created by the German pharmaceutical company Grünenthal, a drug called Contergan. It relieved the oppressive anxiety of the post-war world, the nervous tics and trembling hands. It granted a deep, serene sleep, unavailable to those who still remembered the wail of sirens and the roar of bombs falling on their cities. And most importantly, it worked a miracle for pregnant women, instantly and completely conquering morning sickness. Advertisements screamed from every newspaper page, from every pharmacy poster, the safest drug ever created by mankind. Absolutely non-toxic. An overdose is physically impossible. So safe it can even be given to fussy children instead of a lullaby. These slogans became a mantra for an entire generation. They were lying. Every word in those advertisements was a cynical, coldly calculated, murderous lie. And for this lie, the world paid with thousands of lives that never even began, and tens of thousands of lives turned into a daily, hourly, lifelong battle with their own bodies. They were not selling a sleeping pill. They were selling a concentrated poison that acted with surgical precision on the most vulnerable and defenseless thing in the universe, the human embryo, in the sacred silence of the mother's womb. They had created a chemical weapon and were selling it like cough drops. The doctors didn't know what to tell the parents. They would look at the floor, avert their eyes, and mumble something about spontaneous mutation, a rare genetic defect, or the will of God. They advised them to give these creatures, these failed specimens, to state orphanages and forget about them as if they were a bad dream, to erase this horror from memory, to have new, healthy ones. It was easier for everyone that way, except for one person, the mother. But how can a mother forget her child, no matter what they are like? How can you erase the memory of their tiny, warm body, their scent, their quiet, soundless suffering? Fathers went mad with helpless grief and a primitive animal shame. Families fell apart under the weight of an unbearable burden that destroyed love, faith, and the very fabric of reality. It wasn't a disease, it was a plague created by the hands of a man in a white coat, a plague born in a test tube. And while thousands of families were learning to live in this personal hell, the architects of this hell were counting their profits, popping open bottles of champagne. They celebrated record sales, not suspecting that a reckoning awaited them. The Grünenthal company knew. They knew about the side effects long before the first deformed child let out their first silent cry. Adults taking the drug as a sleeping pill complained en masse of irreversible nerve damage, peripheral neuritis. Their hands and feet went numb, burned like fire, and lost feeling forever. But these reports, coming from doctors all over the country, were simply filed in a folder marked insignificant. The profits were too great to stop the perfectly tuned conveyor belt that was already bringing in millions. They decided that a few hundred crippled adults were an acceptable price for world domination. When the first, still tentative reports of newborns with seal limbs, phocomelia, began to come in, they did not recall the drug. They doubled their efforts to defend it. They hired an army of lawyers to sue any doctor, journalist, or scientist who dared to question their miracle pill. They hired private investigators to dig up dirt on their critics and destroy their reputations, their careers, their lives. They turned a scientific debate into a war of annihilation. They kept selling in 46 countries around the world, under dozens of different names: Distaval in the UK, Softenon in Holland, Thalidomide, Neurosedin, Kevadon. The monster changed its names, changed its packaging, but its essence remained the same. It maimed and it killed, and it seemed that nothing could stop it. They thought they had bought everything and intimidated everyone, that their empire, built on lies and money, was unshakable. But they had not counted on one thing. On the other side of the world, in a modest paper-strewn office of the American Food and Drug Administration, FDA, sat a woman who could not be bought, broken, or intimidated. Her name was Frances Oldham Kelsey, and she, an ordinary public servant, single-handedly stood in the way of this almighty pharmaceutical hydra. She became the wall against which the wave of a global catastrophe crashed, saving the United States from an epidemic of deformed children. But this was just the tip of the iceberg, beneath which lay a story of incredible greed, systemic corruption, and criminal negligence, with roots stretching back to Germany's darkest past, to the ashes of the Third Reich. To understand how this nightmare became possible, one must return to its very heart, to post-war Germany. The country lay in ruins, but not just physical ones. The ruins were in their souls, humiliated, crushed, burdened by a monstrous, unspeakable guilt. The nation desperately needed redemption, a symbol of a new beginning. And it found one in the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. New factories, shiny cars on the autobahns, full shop windows. Germany wanted to prove to the world, and, more importantly, to itself, that it could create, not just destroy. It wanted to wash itself clean of its past, of the smell of blood and ash. The pharmaceutical industry became one of the main symbols of this revival. Clean, scientific, high-tech, progressive. It promised a future without pain, without fear, without disease. It was the perfect industry for a nation trying to wash away the blood and filth of millions of victims. And at the center of this revival was the company Grünenthal GmbH, founded in 1946 in the small town of Stolberg, near Aachen. It was created by the Wirtz family, wealthy industrialists, manufacturers of soap and perfume, whose past was far from as clean and fragrant as their new, gleaming white laboratories. They wanted to create something more than just a business. They wanted to create a legend that would overshadow their dark past. Hermann Wirtz, the head of the clan, had been a staunch member of the Nazi Party since 1933, from the very beginning of Hitler's rise to power. During the war, his enterprises, like many others in the Third Reich, actively used the forced labor of prisoners of war and concentration camp inmates. These slaves, who worked to the point of complete exhaustion, were as much a raw material for his business as the chemicals for soap. But after Germany's defeat, in the chaos of denazification, the Wirtzes, like thousands of other industrialists, quickly swapped their NSDAP party badges for respectable business suits. They presented themselves as victims of the regime, ordinary businessmen who were forced to cooperate and received a green light from the Allies to build a new industrial empire. Grünenthal became their flagship, their ticket to a respectable future, laundered from the past. They didn't just want to make money, they wanted to create something iconic, a product that would make their name famous worldwide, just as aspirin had made Bayer famous. They craved their own aspirin. And they got it, only their aspirin turned out to be a monster, which in its essence was a continuation of the same inhumane philosophy they so diligently disavowed. This philosophy regarded human life as a bargaining chip in the pursuit of a great goal, be it racial supremacy or market share. The architect of this monster, its scientific father, was Dr. Heinrich Müchter, a talented chemist and physician whose biography also had sinister dark spots that he carefully tried to hide. During the Second World War, as a major in the medical corps, he worked at the Institute for Typhus and Virus Research in occupied Krakow. This institute was under the authority of the Wehrmacht's Army High Command, and there are compelling documented grounds to believe that experiments were conducted there on concentration camp prisoners, including from nearby Auschwitz. Scientists in white coats searched for a typhus vaccine, using living people as expendable material, infecting them and observing their agonizing death throes. Heinrich Müchter, a man who had taken the Hippocratic Oath, saw these people not as patients, but merely as biological material. After the war, Müchter, like many other scientists with questionable pasts, was gladly welcomed into the new German industry. The country needed brains and experience, not moral compasses. The past was to be forgotten, buried under the foundations of new factories. But it did not disappear, it was simply waiting for its time to sprout again. In the sparkling clean laboratories of Grünenthal, heading the research department, Müchter and his team were given an ambitious task: to find a new, cheap way to produce antibiotics. During one of the experiments, in the course of a routine synthesis, they obtained a byproduct, a compound called Thalidomide. Later, its cumbersome name was shortened for convenience to Thalidomide. Initially, it was tested as an anticonvulsant in the hope of creating a cure for epilepsy, but it showed no efficacy in this capacity. The substance was deemed useless and was supposed to be discarded, just like dozens of other failed chemical compounds. But something made the scientists curious. Someone on the team, whose name is lost to history, suggested testing its sedative properties, testing it as a tranquilizer. It was a chance decision that changed the course of medical history. And then a miracle happened. During tests on mice and rats, the scientists discovered an astonishing, unheard-of thing. The animals could be given gigantic, absurd doses of thalidomide, but they did not die. They simply fell into a deep, peaceful sleep and then woke up as if nothing had happened, alert and active. It was incredible. Any other hypnotic, from barbiturates to chloral hydrate, had a clear, lethal dose, exceeding which led to respiratory arrest and death. Thalidomide, it seemed, had none at all. The conclusion was drawn instantly with a criminal, arrogant haste, driven by the thirst for commercial success. The drug was completely safe. They didn't even consider the fundamental scientific fact that what is safe for a rat can be deadly for a human. It was a fatal error, born of hubris and scientific negligence. They tested it on rodents, whose metabolism and embryonic development features are radically different from those of humans. They did not conduct a single serious test on pregnant animals, not one. It simply did not occur to them because it was not part of the standard protocols of the time, and doing anything beyond the protocol meant spending extra money and time. They saw what they desperately wanted to see: a perfect, commercially flawless product for a market plagued by post-war anxiety and insomnia. The company's marketers seized upon this idea of absolute safety as if it were a gold mine. They could already see the advertising slogans and pictured sales growth charts in their minds, but none of them understood that they had just let a genie out of the bottle, a genie that would demand a bloody price, or perhaps they did not want to understand. But the real commercial breakthrough, which turned the mistake into a global catastrophe, happened almost by chance. One of the company's employees, whose name history has not preserved, gave a few free samples of the tablets to his pregnant wife, who was suffering from severe morning sickness that was making her life hell. The effect was instantaneous and astounding. The nausea that had tormented her for weeks vanished without a trace. This mundane story, told over lunch in the corporate cafeteria, reached the management and neon dollar signs lit up in the director's eyes. The market for sleeping pills was large and competitive, but the market for safe drugs for pregnant women was a virtually untouched gold mine. They had found their unique niche, their holy grail. The decision was made immediately to promote Contagon primarily as an ideal, harmless remedy for morning sickness. They did not know that they had just signed the death warrant for thousands of unborn children. Or, what was even worse, they didn't care at all. After all, they were on the verge of billion-dollar profits, and moral pangs are bad for digestion. The monster was unleashed on October 1st, 1957. On that day, Contagon arrived in the pharmacies of West Germany. It was sold without a prescription. Anyone could walk into a pharmacy and buy this safe sedative, like a pack of aspirin or cough drops. The marketing campaign launched by Grünenthal was unprecedented in its scale and aggression. Thousands of sales representatives, young, ambitious men in impeccable suits with practiced smiles, flooded doctors' offices across the country, praising the drug and handing out generous free samples. The advertising budgets were colossal. Contagon was presented not just as a medicine, but as a friend of the family, a caring helper that would restore peace and harmony to the home. Advertising posters depicted smiling mothers embracing their children with the caption, "A calm mother, a happy child." This idyllic picture concealed an abyss of suffering. Doctors, weary of patients addicted to dangerous and toxic barbiturates, which were often used for suicides, enthusiastically welcomed the new product. Finally, there was a sleeping pill that couldn't be used to commit suicide, that couldn't cause an accidental overdose. It seemed like a panacea, a true revolution in pharmacology. With ease and a clear conscience, they prescribed it to everyone: anxious housewives, nervous businessmen, the elderly, and, of course, pregnant women, for whom morning sickness was a real torment. A Contagon tablet before bed became as commonplace as a morning cup of coffee. No one suspected what a sinister death counter had been started the moment the first tablet was taken from the bottle. The doomsday clock for thousands of families began its quiet, inexorable countdown, and no one heard its ticking over the loud advertising slogans. The first alarm bells rang as early as 1959, but no one wanted to hear them. Doctors throughout Germany began to notice strange and agonizing symptoms in their patients who had been taking Contagon for a long time. Numbness in the fingers and toes, a tormenting tingling sensation, as if thousands of icy needles were piercing the flesh, a burning, unbearable pain that made it impossible to sleep at night. The diagnosis was grim: peripheral neuritis, irreversible damage to the nerve endings. Dozens and then hundreds of reports about this severe side effect landed on the desks of Grünenthal's management. Internal meetings at the company became increasingly tense. Voices in expensive offices grew louder, not out of concern for people, but from the fear of losing money. They saw in these reports not a human tragedy, but a threat to their bonuses and dividends. The company's reaction was a model of corporate cynicism and criminal negligence. Instead of immediately launching an investigation and warning the medical community, they launched an active campaign to conceal the information. They categorically denied any link between the drug and nerve damage, blaming it all on other illnesses, alcoholism, or vitamin deficiencies in the patients. They threatened lawsuits against doctors who dared to speak publicly about the problem. The company's internal documents, made public years later, leave no doubt. They were fully aware of the danger, but consciously chose a path of lies and intimidation to protect their fabulous profits. They decided that a few hundred cases of neuritis was an acceptable price for billion-dollar revenues. But what happened next surpassed all their most cynical calculations and turned their crime into a catastrophe of historic proportions. In late 1959, and then more and more frequently in 1960, strange, frightening things began to happen in German maternity hospitals. Pediatricians, one after another, encountered an extremely rare congenital malformation that had previously appeared in medical literature only a few times in all of human history. Phocomelia, seal limbs. Children were being born with underdeveloped or completely absent long bones in their arms and legs. Hands were attached directly to the shoulders and feet to the hips. In addition, other horrifying anomalies were observed: absence of the outer ears, congenital deafness and blindness, complex heart defects, and kidney and intestinal defects. It was a silent epidemic, but no one understood its cause. In desperation, doctors speculated about the effects of radiation from nuclear tests or some unknown, insidious virus. No one could have imagined that the culprit behind this nightmare was sitting in the medicine cabinet of almost every German home. But time went on, and the number of deformed children grew exponentially, setting the stage for a horrifying discovery that would change the world forever. A key role in exposing the monster hiding in a white pill was played by two people, working independently of each other on opposite sides of the planet. They became the David who challenged the pharmaceutical Goliath. The first was Dr. Widukind Lenz, a pediatrician and geneticist at the Hamburg University Clinic. In 1961, he noticed a frightening, blood-curdling pattern. More and more infants with characteristic, almost identical deformities were being admitted to his clinic. This could not be a coincidence. It was an epidemic. He began to methodically, with German meticulousness, question the mothers, creating detailed questionnaires about their pregnancies, what illnesses they had, what they ate, where they had been, what medications they took. And again in his notes, written in neat medical handwriting, the same brand name emerged: Contagon. Lenz felt a chill run down his spine. He sat in his office late at night, surrounded by medical records and photographs of maimed infants, and the puzzle in his head was coming together into a horrifying picture. The smell of old paper and faint hospital antiseptic mixed with the smell of cold sweat. He realized that he was on the verge of a monstrous, incredible discovery. He immediately contacted his pediatric colleagues throughout West Germany and asked them to check his hunch. The replies came one after another, and they all confirmed his worst fears. Almost every mother who gave birth to a child with phocomelia had taken thalidomide in the early stages of pregnancy, during that very critical period between the 20th and 36th day after conception, when the fetus's limbs and organs are formed. Lenz gathered all his data, and on November 18, 1961, he spoke at a medical conference. He did not beat around the bush. He directly accused Contagon, the country's best-selling drug, of causing an epidemic of congenital deformities. It was tantamount to detonating an atomic bomb in the center of the German pharmaceutical industry. But the company was not going to give up without a fight. At almost the same time, in distant, sun-drenched Australia, obstetrician William McBride encountered 3 cases of infants born with identical, gruesome deformities in his small Sydney hospital. Shocked to the core, he too, like Lenz, began his own investigation and quickly established a connection with the drug sold in Australia under the name Distaval. It was the same thalidomide. Without losing a day, McBride wrote a short but devastatingly accurate letter to the prestigious medical journal The Lancet, warning colleagues around the world of the danger. His letter was published on December 16, 1961. 2 independent investigations conducted thousands of kilometers apart came to the same irrefutable conclusion. The wall of silence and lies, so carefully constructed by the company Grünenthal, began to crumble with a deafening crash. The company's reaction was predictable and furious. They called Lenz's findings unproven, unscientific, and irresponsible. They threatened him with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for libel and damage to their business reputation. Grünenthal's lawyers worked around the clock trying to silence the press and prevent the information from spreading. They exerted enormous pressure on government health agencies, persuading officials not to make hasty decisions and to wait for more complete data. Every day of delay brought them millions of marks and condemned dozens more unborn children to suffering, but it was already too late. The German newspaper Welt am Sonntag published a devastating front-page article about Lenz's investigation. The scandal erupted to a national and then global level. Denying the obvious became impossible. On November 26, 1961, under crushing pressure from the public and the press, Grünenthal finally announced the voluntary withdrawal of Contagon sales in Germany. Soon the drug was banned in other countries as well, one after another. But the conveyor belt of horror could no longer be stopped. Women who had taken the fateful pill months earlier continued to give birth. The peak of this gruesome tragedy occurred in 1961-1962. These were the years of a bloody harvest. Maternity wards across Europe and beyond turned into branches of hell, where instead of the cries of new life, only the muffled sobs of mothers and the frightened whispers of doctors could be heard. Thousands of tiny, mutilated bodies became a living, screaming monument to corporate greed and scientific arrogance. And while Europe was counting its victims in horror across the ocean, in the quiet of Washington offices, another drama was unfolding, almost unknown to the general public, the story of a quiet, heroic deed that prevented a catastrophe of American proportions. In 1960, when thalidomide was already being sold widely in Europe, the Canadian pharmaceutical company Richardson Merrill submitted an application to the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for the approval of a new sleeping pill called Kevadon. This was the very same thalidomide packaged in a new box for the American market. The company was already anticipating huge profits, expecting to capture the giant US market. They were confident that the approval would be a mere formality. The drug was already selling successfully in Europe and neighboring Canada. Its safety, it seemed, had been proven by thousands of rave reviews. The application, a voluminous tome of clinical data and marketing promises, landed on the desk of a new rank-and-file employee in the new drugs division, Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey. It was her first major assignment in her new job, and she had no idea that the fates of thousands of American families depended on her decision. Frances Kelsey was no ordinary bureaucrat. She was an experienced physician and pharmacologist with a doctorate from the University of Chicago. Back in the 1930s, as a student, she had participated in the investigation of the elixir sulfanilamide tragedy, a medicine that killed more than 100 people, mostly children, due to the use of a toxic solvent, diethylene glycol, essentially antifreeze. That case forever burned the main rule of pharmacology into her mind: never take a manufacturer at their word. She knew that behind the shiny packaging, convincing charts, and beautiful advertising slogans, death could be hiding. She was a scientist to the core, and her main tool was cold, impartial skepticism. She didn't look at marketing brochures, but at raw data, and her scientist's intuition told her that something was wrong. Studying the application for Kevadon, Kelsey felt an inexplicable, intuitive unease. The data provided by Richardson Merrill seemed superficial, incomplete, and unconvincing to her. One fact particularly alarmed her. The report claimed the drug was barely absorbed into the bloodstream, which was an obvious lie, as it had a systemic sedative effect on the entire body. If they were lying about this, where else were they lying? And then she stumbled upon a small, almost unnoticeable note in a British medical journal that mentioned cases of peripheral neuritis in patients who had been taking thalidomide for a long time in Great Britain. For her, this was a red flag. If the drug irreversibly damages peripheral nerves in adults, what could it do to the fragile, rapidly developing organism of a fetus, which is essentially one continuous nervous system in the process of formation? This question haunted her. Kelsey rejected the application. She demanded that the company provide more complete safety data, especially regarding its effects on the fetus and its use during pregnancy. For Richardson Merrill, this was a shock. They were not accustomed to such resistance from the FDA, which in those years was quite friendly to the pharmaceutical industry and often approved drugs on a tight schedule. They began to exert colossal, unprecedented pressure on Kelsey. Company vice presidents called her, persuading, coaxing, and then threatening her. They complained about her to her own superiors, accusing her of stubbornness, incompetence, and bureaucratic red tape. She was called a petty, stubborn bureaucrat who was preventing Americans from getting access to a wonder drug that gets rid of insomnia. But Frances Kelsey was as unyielding as a rock. Again and again, month after month, she sent the application back with the same demand. The data is insufficient. Provide proof of safety during pregnancy. She single-handedly held back the onslaught of a multi-million-dollar corporation. This unequal battle lasted for more than a year. Richardson Merrill, absolutely confident in their eventual victory, even began so-called clinical trials, which were in fact a disguised and illegal marketing campaign. They sent out more than 2.5 million thalidomide pills to 2,000 American doctors, who in turn distributed them to their patients, including hundreds of pregnant women. Essentially, they were conducting an illegal experiment on their own population to create market demand by the time of official approval. As a result, 17 children were born in the US with thalidomide-related deformities. 17, not tens of thousands, as in Germany or the United Kingdom. And it was all thanks to the quiet, persistent, almost fanatical stubbornness of one woman who was simply doing her job well. She became the last bastion against a global epidemic. And then at the end of 1961, news from Europe reached America. Newspaper articles about the Contagion children, photographs of infants without arms and legs. In Frances Kelsey's office, piled high with reports on Kevadon, a dead silence fell. She looked at these photographs and a cold horror crept over her. She realized what a catastrophe she had saved her country from. If she had given in to the pressure, if she had put her signature on that application, the streets of American cities today would be full of people with flippers instead of arms. Her quiet, methodical, unseen feat prevented a national tragedy. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy awarded Frances Kelsey the highest civilian award for government employees, the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. She became a national heroine, and her story served as the impetus for the passage of the Kefauver-Harris Amendment, new, much stricter drug control laws that forever changed the work of the FDA and the entire global pharmaceutical industry, forcing them to prove not only the efficacy, but also the safety of their products. For the thousands of thalidomide victims around the world, the exposure of Grünenthal and the ban of the drug were only the beginning of a new, lifelong struggle, a struggle for survival, for dignity, for basic justice. Of the approximately 15,000 children born with severe developmental defects, only half survived. Their childhood was spent not on playgrounds, but in hospital wards, amidst endless surgeries, fittings for ugly and uncomfortable prosthetics, and agonizing, grueling rehabilitation. They learned to eat with their feet, skillfully wielding a fork clamped between their toes. They learned to write by clenching a pen in their teeth. They learned to operate complex, heavy electric prostheses that constantly broke and chafed their delicate skin into bleeding sores. Every day they lived was a feat that demanded incredible willpower and courage. They were warriors fighting a battle that had been forced upon them even before they were born. Society, having recovered from the initial shock and sympathy, often turned away from them. They were teased in schools, pointed at in the streets. They were considered inferior, a burden on the state and their families. Parents, tormented by an enduring sense of guilt, financial difficulties, and physical exhaustion, could not always bear this burden. Many families broke apart. Many children ended up in state-run institutions, where conditions were far from humane, where they were merely objects of study and pity. This was a generation betrayed twice, first by the pharmaceutical company that maimed them for profit, and then by a society that did not know what to do with them and preferred to ignore their existence. But they did not give up, and their coming battle for justice was to shake the world once more. The trial against 9 executives and employees of Grünenthal, which began in 1968 in Aachen, turned into a shameful farce. It was the longest and most expensive trial in German history at that time. The defense, consisting of the country's best and most expensive lawyers, inundated the court with tons of paper, challenging every document, every witness testimony. They tried to prove that the deformities could have been caused by anything from nuclear tests to genetic predisposition. After 2.5 years of hearings, hundreds of witnesses and mountains of evidence, the case was closed without a verdict. The court deemed that the guilt of the individuals was relatively minor and that continuing the trial was not in the public interest. Not one of the company managers responsible for this man-made disaster went to prison. Not one. The company simply agreed to pay compensation of 100 million Deutsche Marks into a specially created fund for the German victims. It was a laughable, humiliating sum, barely enough to cover the most basic medical needs for a few years. Grünenthal, in essence, bought its way out of justice, leaving its victims alone with their lifelong suffering. Justice was sold for pennies. Years passed. The surviving Thalidomide children grew up. Against all odds, they received an education, learned professions, started families, and gave birth to healthy children, proving to the world that physical disabilities cannot break the human spirit. They became artists, lawyers, programmers, activists, but with age, their bodies, worn out by decades of unnatural movements and colossal strain on their spines and joints, began to fail. They developed severe arthritis, chronic pain in their backs, necks, and remaining joints. Many who could manage without assistance in their youth are now confined to wheelchairs. Their medical expenses grew exponentially while the payments from the fund remained meager. It became clear that silence was no longer an option. And then as adults, they began a new fight. A fight for recognition and fair compensation. They formed associations, organized loud protests at the Grünenthal headquarters. They gave countless interviews, wrote books, and made documentary films. They did not let the world forget the crime committed half a century ago. They demanded that the company whose fortune today is measured in billions of euros and which continues to prosper take full and indefinite responsibility for its actions. Only in 2012, more than 50 years after the tragedy, did the head of Grünenthal finally issue a public apology. But for most of the victims, these were just empty, belated words. Apologies cannot bring back arms and legs. Apologies cannot soothe the chronic pain that accompanies them every minute of every day. And in this tragic saga, there is one more final, paradoxical, and frightening twist. The monster did not die, it was simply put in a very strong cage. In the following decades, scientists discovered that thalidomide, in addition to its horrifying teratogenic effect, the ability to cause fetal deformities, also possesses other unique properties. It suppresses the growth of blood vessels and has a powerful immunomodulatory effect. It proved to be astonishingly effective in treating certain forms of leprosy and, most importantly, in combating multiple myeloma, a deadly blood cancer. Today, the drug is once again used in medicine around the world and saves thousands of lives, but now, under the strictest total control, every pill is accounted for. It is categorically absolutely forbidden for pregnant women and women of childbearing age not using reliable contraception. The control program bears the symbolic name STEPS, System for Thalidomide Education and Prescribing Safety. The story of thalidomide is not just a chapter from a medical history textbook. It is an eternal, unhealing warning, a warning about what corporate greed is capable of, hidden behind a mask of science and false concern for people, about how easily and imperceptibly one can cross the thin line between healing and mass murder, and about how any monster, even the most terrible one, can one day return if we allow ourselves to forget with what blood and suffering our present-day safety was paid for. It has not disappeared. It is simply waiting for its moment in new, shiny packaging with a new, pleasant-sounding name promising another miracle. And somewhere, right now, in the silence of some laboratory, in the pursuit of fame and profit, its successor is possibly already being born. And only the memory of thousands of mutilated fates can become a shield against it. This war will never end.